Okay.
Wow, so we're live, and today is an interesting day. It's Conversations with Aibee, and I have two amazing guests. One of the things that thrills me every time we get on this program is the fact that we have the benefit of diverse views from the sector and that we have the benefit of informed views from the sector. Today, my guests, I have Victoria Ibezim Ohaeri. Victoria is the founder, and I like to call her the boss, but she doesn't like to be called that, the director of research at Spaces for Change. Victoria has been involved in driving policy, especially policy that is based on in depth research, critical research that has to affect matters that deal with us as individuals. Victoria operates in the public space, trying to ensure that she's driving shelter issues, and other things like that. Victoria Ibezim, very well known as VIO, is a lawyer, but she's a lot more than that. I like to say that she's very much the conscience for many of us in the public sector. I met Victoria when she was needling me about ensuring that the budget of River State was in the public space. And she said, "It is not there, I can't see it." So please welcome my guest, Victoria Ibezim Ohaeri. Victoria, you're welcome to Conversations with Aibee.
Thank you, Dim. Thank you for inviting me.
My second guest unfortunately has a problem with his video, but his voice is available and we will take it. We decided that we will take him video or not. Comrade Chief Chika Onuegbu is the Deputy National President of the Trade Unions Congress. Chika has done a lot of work with regards to the petroleum industry's bill. He's been in this matter from day one. And I said to myself, who best to give us a critical analysis of what has held this matter back from the industry perspective, from the operator's perspective, but also he's a chief in Emoha. So he is from a host community. He understands the dynamics, both from the sides of the operator, from the side of a host community, and from the side of government. Comrade, you're very welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Right, we fire the first salvo. This PIB. First of all, is people will ask you, we don't even understand it anymore. There are 1 million versions. We don't know what it is. We don't know where we're going to with it. We don't even understand how it affects our lives as people who produce oil. So please, can you people break it down for us? That's the kind of what you hear on the street. So let me start with you, comrade. Exactly how many versions of the PIB do we have right now in circulation?
Okay, so we've had several PIBs as National Assembly go, but you know, the PIB actually started from the OGIC, that's Oil and Gas Implementation Committee that was set up by the then President Obasanjo in April 2000. And then that committee submitted their report. And then, of course, there was an executive bill, which was the first PIB 2008. So that PIB suffered a lot of issues. The first was that there was the allegation that there were multiple versions of that PIB. That was mainly between, so the integrated joint, some sort of, the joint venture we have now not incorporated, so they wanted them to be incorporated. And so the IOCs and the workers in the IOCs felt that that would mean that the government people will be in charge, since NNPC has a greater majority of the shares. That was an issue. And then there was also disagreements over the fiscal terms. So, of course, then there was also host community issues and frontier exploration. So that PIB didn't see the light of the day. It was not even passed by the National Assembly. Then, of course, came to 2012, several committees were set up by the then Minister of Petroleum, and then one of it was the PIB committee. And finally, that PIB became known as the 2012 PIB. And that actually provided 10% host community fund. But of course, that was a major contention in the National Assembly. To be blunt, the National Assembly members from the northern part of the country felt that that the people from the south, especially the host communities, that they have Niger Delta Development Commission, and that they have 13% derivation fund, and now they want to have 10%. So that was a very big issue. Again, as usual, there was disagreement over fiscal terms between the government and international oil companies. And then there was also the issue around the excessive powers of the Minister of Petroleum. And then, of course, that bill was more complicated because it was one bill, one whole bill, because there are models of actually legislating petroleum industrial reform. It can be one comprehensive bill, or it can be multiple bills. So the multiple bill, single bill structure, again, that became very complex, and only few people could read the bill from the beginning to the end. So that again, so that one didn't go. And then, of course, that was the 7th National Assembly. Then we came to the 8th National Assembly. The 8th National Assembly decided to divide the PIBs into 4. And then those 4, you had the PIGB, the one on governance. Then you had the administration dealing with acreages. And then, of course, you had the fiscal terms dealing with taxation and related matters. And then, of course, you had the host communities. So, but they decided to take the the PIGB first, the one on governance. The National Assembly passed it into law, but of course, you know that there were so much controversies between that National Assembly and the executive. So, of course, the executive didn't assent to it. And we had raised this concern because even when the minister came for the public hearing, he raised the concern that they were working on their own version. So when the minister said that, understanding the implication of politics, it was very clear that they were not keen about having that go through. Again, the same issues, powers of the ministers were also the same. Of course, people raised the issues. Why is there no host community fund being discussed? What of the fiscal aspects? And then, of course, the president also raised issues around the so much money that was allocated to the regulatory commission, I think about 10%. And then, of course, the one other agency that has to do with this PEF, yes, Petroleum Equalization Fund. And so that ultimately, by the end of the day, the president didn't assent to that bill. And then, of course, while that was happening, the National Assembly now brought 3 other bills. And included in those other 3 bills is the Petroleum Host and Impacted Communities Bill. And then, of course, yes, we all went there. Madam VIO was also there. And each of us raised our various concerns around that. Of course, we doubt whether they will actually become they passed. So they were not passed, and then we are back to square one. I think last month we had some discussions with Tim Okun, who is there is a government team working on the new PIB, and then we had discussions with them and requested that we expected that by now they should share what they're working on with stakeholders. So they said they wanted to avoid multiple versions, and so that as soon as they are done and it's passed to the Ministry and Federal Executive Council, that they will get the stakeholders their copy. So, of course, in between this, the government also went and amended the what we call the PSC Act, the Inland Deep Water Act, of course, which is still being discussed between them and the IOCs and the rest. So we are where we are as of today. Started year 2000 April up to now, there is no bill, no law called PIB or anything resembling that.
20 years after. VIO, this looks to me like all motion, no movement. A lot of motion, a lot of hubris, a lot of noise, but no movement. What is going on? I know that you were very vocal and you had held a lot of stakeholder engagements with host communities. And indeed, you even invited stakeholders in the industry to be at the hearing. I don't know whether you were even impressed with the responses at the level of host communities. Did the state governments even bother to make presentation? Quite frankly, from your perspective, have we made any progress in 20 years?
Okay. Good evening, listeners and viewers. Thank you, Aibee, for bringing me on the show. The question about PIB is interesting and also a very emotional one. Emotional in the sense that there's been a lot of movement without motion, just like you mentioned. A lot of advocacy have gone in that looks like it went to nowhere. A lot of organizing, a lot of awareness creation, a lot of capacity building, a lot of resources have been sunk into this project. But I heard when Chief said he's tired, and I have found myself making some of those comments, both privately and in public spaces as well. So in terms of to what extent have state governments or communities, have they been involved in the process? I would say yes and no. Yes, to the extent that in 2012, there have been a lot of proposals that have been put before the legislature. In 2012, the Azanis version. There was also the 2016 version. There's the 2018 version. Which part of which we're discussing, and all of them making quite a range of proposals for improving the situation in the host communities. Then in all of them, I will speak from angle of Spaces for Change. First point of entry towards getting communities involved is to create awareness about the legal framework and to what extent that it affects them, to what extent that it will benefit them, or to what extent is going to hurt, violate their existing rights. So I think we did that massively across the region. And the Niger Delta region is a very interesting region. It's one of the most exciting places to work because once people have the information, they are willing to act almost with speed. Almost all the conversations we had, whether it's in Akwa Ibom, in Bayelsa, in Edo, in Port Harcourt, they turned up in mass. I remember the last consultative meeting we had in Port Harcourt. Their leaders, even the political leaders, former technocrats, they came out in mass. The people of the region are always very willing to engage in any conversation that affects them collectively. So it is a plus for the region. But where I said no is that that's willingness and collective inspiration to do something. I don't see it's absent in the political circles. It's absent as well in official circles. And when I say official circles, I mean at the state level, like the state government coming to build consensus on key issues. I think that is important because I've attended every public hearing on the Petroleum Industry Bill ever conducted in this country. Attended all. I can't think of anyone I missed. And at the beginning, I think states in the north made more active contributions to the deliberations than even the Niger Delta states. So that needs to happen a lot more. I would have loved to attribute it to maybe lack of information, because when information was brought closer to them, some of them started acting. In 2018, we started engaging local government chairmen and the state legislatures in Niger Delta. One of them, the Akwa Ibom state, was particularly very responsive during the period. And they participated in a lot of consultative meetings that we had and provided technical support to some of the state houses of assembly. But at the last public hearing on the host communities, I think the River State government also sent a delegation to make a representation. So states in the Niger Delta, it shouldn't be episodic, it shouldn't be intermittent, because whatever affects the Niger Delta should be a collective concern of Niger Delta people. So we need to have both citizens. There should be a connect between citizens' individual contributions to the passage of the bill and the state contribution, official contribution. Why it is important is because the legislature seems to pay more attention to state and official contribution. They pay more attention to it. They consider it to be serious. They consider it to be the official position of the state, rather than just a cluster of individuals making presentations about what their views would be. And finally, I think it's important to look into what the various bills on host communities say. All of them are not uniform. They proposed different arrangements for improving lives of people, or taking benefits to people of the region. All of them have their strengths, all of them also have their downsides. The 2012 version from Diezani was, in my view, why I call it a good draft is that I can look at it now, I can now compare it to 2016 and 2018 draft. And I think it was more protective instrument for the people of the region. But it was heavy on the power of the minister, and it was also so heavy on environmental protection. So people thought it was just really about Niger Delta, Niger Delta. So a lot of people started kicking against it on the basis of that. The 2018 version came up with 2016 version, I think it was very interesting because it started by trying to describe what is even a host community. We've been talking about host community. What qualifies it to be a host community? And it came up with certain interesting definitions. It came up with 3 definitions, categorizations. First being the upstream petroleum communities, they had the facility communities, then they also had the pipeline communities. And the difference means that for the upstream communities are the people that have oil on the ground.
Right.
Then the pipeline communities are like communities, you find many of them in Ijegun, in Lagos, in Ejigbo, where they just have big pipelines. All over this country, you have pipelines crisscrossing, running through. So they are pipeline communities. Then you have facility communities, let's say like you have them in Kaduna, they just host refineries and nothing more. So, and the argument was that different kinds of this type of communities bear impact, environmental impact of oil and oil extraction activity. But the upstream communities came with the argument that the consequences are not uniform. And I agree with that. Their consequences are not uniform. So that categorization was too wide that 3/4 of the country will fall under that category, making, defeating the objectives. It will defeat the objectives of the bill. So another thing, the 2016 and the 2018, the 2016 created a different kind of mechanism, which Chief was trying to describe. A kind of mechanism whereby you have a trust that is comprising of both women, youth below the age of 40, set up in the community, and the community trust will be responsible for managing whatever contributions made into that purse, and they will use it to develop their own community, which sounded, to be frank, compared to the 2018 version, I thought it was healthy, just needed us to tinker a bit with it, here and there. But the 2018 version is the one I am most concerned about. And why am I so concerned about it? Because it looked like a CSR law. I think it's a CSR law because oil companies in the region have quite a wide range of corporate social responsibility initiatives. And what that law came to do, that 2018 proposal, is simply to legitimize those CSR objectives, which puts a lot of power in the
hands of the operators,
the company,
yes,
not on the communities. So if you are putting almost all the power on communities, you are only making communities just passive beneficiaries of goodwill of companies. So that was one of the arguments that we made also against that particular proposal in 2018.
Right. Thank you so much, Fia. Very enlightening. And some of my takeaways from this is the fact that clearly under former Minister Dizani, perhaps because she had worked in that sector and because she's from the region, there was a bit more attention to putting the rights in the hands of the people. And that really is the point that had led to all of the agitation in the Niger Delta. The question of who exactly holds the power, and I use that very advisedly in broad terms. Comrade, let me come back to you. One of the issues, like you said, at the point where this conversation went to the National Assembly, was this fear that, oh my goodness, everything is going to the Niger Delta. They have the 13%. They're going to get 10% again. Oh my God. And people panic. And I'm wondering if we situate that against prior to 1960. In fact, earlier on, when we had the cocoa, and this had been the argument of peoples from the region, that everybody produced. We produced cocoa here, we had the granite pyramids there, we had the palm oil here, and we all produced and we paid our taxes. And there was the conversation saying, if we were paying taxes at that time, and then sometimes said as much as 50%, what the oil communities are asking for is not up to that. So that's one conversation, and I'll put that aside. Now, a very good break of dawn is the Solid Minerals Act, and the kinds of conversations that went on around that act, and the fact that that act actually does allow host communities some participation, I think a little even beyond the 10%. Now, looking at that and looking at the PIB, would you think that now that we have the Solid Minerals Act duly passed on and the presidential initiative, do you think that we might be able to get everyone to reconsider the fact of the host communities having a bit more participation in a matter that affects their land? And from your perspective, really thinking from your perspective as Penguin, but also as a chief in a host community, what would be your take on this?
Okay, so I want to just be truthful. Nobody gives you a benefit that you don't struggle for.
Right.
Especially when that benefit will mean that they will be losing things. So Nigeria is basically a rent economy. Unfortunately, where the oil is coming from are minorities. So the Niger Delta National Assembly members do not have the numbers to get the bills passed into law. They will actually need the support.
May I interrupt you a little? Do they even have the understanding? Yeah. Because the numbers is one thing, but do they have the understanding? Do you understand that there's a critical need for their voices to be heard?
Okay. Okay, so okay, so I think that some of them do, but not all of them. Some do, obviously, not all, because how you get to know that not all is that even when the public hearing is taking place, some of them that are even members of the PIB committee hardly show up, or they just show up and then go away, just to show their presence and then disappear, and that gives an indication to the others that maybe this is not very keen. These people are not keen about this, or perhaps they are running away from some. Maybe they feel that they may be committing political suicide, taking it very, very seriously. An important difference between the 2012 and the 2018 was that the 2012 was an executive bill that was done by the minister then, Desiani. The 2018 was private member bill that was sponsored by members of the National Assembly. And so to get National Assembly to sponsor that, they needed to get all of them they needed to do a lot of horse trading, and they came to the point of saying 2.5% of OPEX. And if you look at 2.5% of OPEX, is less than what is paid to the NDDC by the oil companies. And then you ask yourself, of what use will that be? And of course, that their expenditure for CSR will become part of that cost, because they're expected to move those expenditures, those CSR projects to the funds. So by the end of the day,
basically, comrade, that meant that law was going to be taking away even the little we had. This is a question of
what that law meant was that it was a case of, instead of losing a cow, you cut the tail. But I think that the Niger Delta people have not really spoken with one voice to say that this is very, very important. I think so. Because if they have done so, I think they should have gotten that passed, even if it is as a separate law, as they try to do, passed very quickly. If you look at the Northeast Development Commission bill, is now a law. It was passed very fast and is now a law. If you look at the solid minerals, it's also now a law, but the one about host communities is not. Now, if you also situate it into the historical context, you will see that historically, even the Wheeling Commission identified the inherent limitations of the people of Niger Delta being minorities in pushing through the agenda for development in the Nigerian nation. And the events have come to actually reveal that. What government seems to be ready to do is to just be doing some kind of intervention here and there. For instance, the amnesty program. For instance, if you look at NDDC, just let them just intervene. Because if you also look at the NDDC and composition of the NDDC and the NDDC Act, you see that the NDDC is not controlled by the Niger Delta people. The NDDC is controlled from the presidency, actually. And so if it's controlled by the presidency, actually, so it's not much of the challenges, the political challenges around that will also showcase in the management of the NDDC. And so the Niger Delta people will not get the benefits that they've been desiring. So as it is, I think that if the Niger Delta people want to get the host community thing, I think they need to have a united voice. I think they need to be consulted in that demand. I think they need to demand for it seriously. I remember going to one public hearing and reaching there and not seeing key stakeholders in the Niger Delta. I don't know if I complained to you about that. They were not there. And I was like, so I will come here. There is a limit to which I'll be speaking for Pengassan and no, I was to speak for Pengassan and no Peng. There's a limit to which I'll become a Niger Delta activist. In fact, by the time in the National Assembly, a Niger Delta activist. So those are some of the kind of challenges. So there is need for a reorientation. One thing people must recognize is the legacies they want to leave behind. I think that if we have a well-structured governance around the host community fund, and then we have 5% at least in the minimum, I think the impact of that will be massive. If we go back and look at practical examples, you go to EPCL, when the element petrochemical was to be privatized, there was this discussion by the stakeholders, including Pengassan and No-Peng. The result of that discussion was that the host communities were given 7.5% of the shares. The state government had 10%. The workers had 2.5%. Now, as at many years ago, that 2.5% of the workers became 1 billion dividend, 1 billion naira dividend. I remember once when the union there was we're having disagreements, and I told them, look, put more effort in trying to make sure that you get these shares and get a 1 billion dividend, so that you will see is ready benefits. So the host communities get about 3 billion naira as dividend from those shares. And of course, that's why you see about Elano investment and the rest of the impact of that on the LMA and those host communities. And we think that if this is done, so when some people say, oh, the host community fund is going to create crisis in the host communities, and I ask, is there no crisis already? There is already crisis. Quenching it by identifying those who carry arms and then leaving those who don't carry arms will only solve the problem in the interim. Over time, people will see the reward of carrying arms, and everybody will begin to carry arms. By then, it will be difficult to do anything. Moreover, and this is more important, the energy industry is going through transition. So renewable energy and all the rest are becoming, taking more important positions. You can see what's happening that the value of Tesla is almost, if not or equal to that of, and sorry, please, this is to remind me that this is when I shut down.
Oh boy. Okay.
Sorry, I beg. This work from home, there is no delineation between work and home, so I have to put this. When I hear it, I know that work has closed for that day. So those are the kind of issues. So truly, the Niger Delta people need to organize themselves, and then they need to demand for it, but they need to do it in such a manner that not just that the struggle will be led by the people that are militant, it should be led by the political leaders and the intellectuals so that they can make sound arguments based on research that when anybody looks at it, they know that these are not the kind of people that you can call aside and want to appease them, hoping that when that is done, they will leave the matter. That's my take.
Thank you so much. VI, I'm going to come back to you. What and just listening to this kind of things. First is I don't know whether I have a feeling of of anger or sadness or pain or a combination of I'm feeling a million emotions right now, and I'm not sure which of those emotions, but I'm trying to ensure that none of them comes to the fore. But there is a problem here, and I'm wondering at your level as spaces for change. Part of what you're doing is getting stakeholders to understand why this is a big deal. Both state actors and non-state actors. Because clearly, if we're going to get our voices heard, we need every hand on deck. We need state actors, we need non-state actors. Let me ask you, VIO, in terms of those engagements and how we're going to go forward, because clearly, if we miss it at this Ninth Assembly, and by the way, the Ninth Assembly has spent some time already. They've spent some time. We're counting the years. And before we shut our eyes and open, we're in 2023, and we're talking of the 10th Assembly, and this bill may still not be anywhere. Meanwhile, so many bills that came after have all been passed. How are we going to get state actors, first of all, at the level of state and local government leaders, at the level of state houses of assembly, at the level of people from the region at the National Assembly, because you've been involved in engagements. How are we going to get all of these people, lock them in a room, throw away the key until they figure out what they're going to do about this bill? VIO.
I didn't hear the last part. I think my internet went off. The last sentence.
All of these people, the state actors, so the state governors, the local government people, the assemblies, federal and state, how do we lock them up in a room, throw away the key until they figure out what they're going to do about getting this bill passed?
Thank you. I think it should be the next step for the region to go, particularly looking at what's happening to some of the existing mechanisms and how they're being turned upside down. The first thing that is partly responsible, what was the first shift that the leaders of the region need to make is that they need to be willing now to be part of this conversation. It's not just something to get involved because it's trending. It's
how
now
do we get them to be willing.
Yeah, how to get them to be willing. Number one is there's something he mentioned. The region needs to identify their thought leaders. The thought leaders, the region, there's so many across the 9 states. It can be one person, it can be you, it can be me. We need to sit down and say, who are the thought leaders in this region? And put them in one, put their names down, and then bring them together in one room to say this needs to be a cross-cutting conversation. They need to come in and at least build consensus on key issues and determine how to proceed. And let me tell you one thing I think is part of the problem in Niger Delta. Most of the interventions have been donor-driven. When you allow donors sometimes shape the agenda, it could interfere with regional agenda. So, and why it's been donor-driven is because the state governments in particular have not come together with their thought leaders and their civil society leaders to say this is an issue of collective priority for all of us. Right. This is something I think, like I told you in the last conversation we were having privately, that we're trying to start a beneficiary campaign in the Niger Delta region. Some of the things we are thinking through, bringing people outside of the donor context and have a regional kind of priority, develop that priority. We're not going to agree on all issues, but there have to be like key points of intersection where people can move forward. That's number one. Number two is need to understand what will this think. Let me assume it's called a think tank group or a thought group or a Niger Delta intellectual group, whatever name is given. First thing they will need to understand is why are the current mechanisms, let's say like NDDC, why are not they delivering on their mandate? From my point of view, I think the problem is because it's in the hand of politicians. It's structured in a way that places enormous power in the hand of politicians. Alternatively, is also too prone to political interference. And number three, it is not the communities in the Niger Delta and have not been placed at the center of these mechanisms. So there needs for a shift on how this to be shared. And why do we call it a benefit sharing? Benefit sharing is to agree on certain key principles. What are the key principles that the region needs to agree on? When the region say we have a right to benefit from whatever oil comes out of our soil, it is not dependent on a breach or a violation. A violation need not occur for them to be entitled to that benefit. That's another thing. When it's conditioned on a violation or a breach, it becomes compensation. It's not benefit. What the compensation simply tries to do is to repair a damage that has been done. So there need not be any damage.
It somehow.
Ameliorate it. So there need not be any damage. That's the first point. Number two, it's not charitable. It's not an act of benevolence, either from the federal government or from an oil company.
Right.
That is part of the problem with previous initiatives, because it's saying you should be grateful. I have been making my government says we've done enough for you. Oil companies put out on their website, take pictures of one or two small hospitals they built after taking billions from your community. So it's making it look like a charitable, handout. No, that needs to change. The third thing that we need to recognize is that it should be structured as a concomitant right of participation. That participation is a legal right. That you come into my community where I farm, and suddenly you find some economic benefit from my community, you have automatically brought me into that conversation. Automatic. Because you are the one coming into my community. I didn't visit yours. I don't even know where you come from.
And I didn't invite you.
And I didn't invite you. So we need to change the color and the character of the conversation. And this cannot happen without the thought leaders. That's part of what needs to happen. The thought leaders coming together to identify these key principles. And this is an argument they need to make to the federal government. So that you have had an NDDC that is not working, that you have had a Niger Delta ministry that is not working. It is not a charitable conversation. If they're not working, then we need to also identify why they are not working. Then I think finally is the community component. What needs to be done to make sure that these benefits trickle down?
Right.
How do we make benefit? Is it enough for politicians to stay in their hotel room in Abuja and make a decision that will benefit Koloama in Bayelsa? Or can they must they make that decision in Koloama? If you want to make a decision about Koloama community in Bayelsa, what is the contribution of the Koloama community before even that contract is approved? It needs to be that rigorous. So that way, even before a contract is awarded, community members need not see it in the news. They need not hear about it in the media. They become aware because the process requires their participation at that integral stage. So these are some of the things that are missing that needs to happen. And I have some ideas, but I think the region needs to wake up. They haven't done enough. From my perspective, the region has not done enough. And in the conversation about the petroleum industry bill, I must give it to the IOCs. They've done the hardest work in terms of lobbying. The first PIB conversation, the public hearing I attended, I was when Diezani was in power in 2012. Almost all the IOCs flew legal experts from different parts of the world, from China, from UK, from America. Why are they spending that money? They consider that framework to be important to them as something that will affect them. I'm not seeing the region show that level of interest. I'm not seeing state governors, the political and intellectuals in that region show that level of interest. So there is time for the region to wake up and make their arguments like others have done.
Right. Let me just say, holding brief for the region without anybody asking me to. But so that doesn't look as if nobody is speaking for the region, let me just say that perhaps we don't understand what manner of animal this PIB is. Maybe we just don't know what manner of animal is it. Is it man or beast? We seem to have that problem. So maybe you forgive us for not understanding the animal. But speaking more seriously, and I come back to you, comrade, part of the things that appears to be stalled because of the non-passage of the PIB, and I'm wondering if government understands it, is the fact that investments in the oil sector, quite frankly, have largely been static. It appears to me that a majority of the IOCs have said, until we know what is really happening, we're going to just ensure that we do the basic minimum to keep our operations going. And I'm asking that question because, again, you work in this sector and also because you speak for Pengasi. Aren't you concerned, even as a staff, and then, of course, also as a member of the oil producing communities? Aren't you concerned that this PIB may actually be stalling investment into the oil and gas sector?
Okay, so I think this is, you can hear me, I guess.
Yes, comrade, we can hear
Can
you.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, comrade.
Yes. So I think this is one issue. Yeah, this is one issue we've raised. By our estimation, we think that Nigeria has lost over $300 billion on investments as a result of the non-passage of the PIB, because a lot of final investment decisions have been delayed because they need to. The oil and gas investment is an investment with a long gestation period. So for you to do the economics, you really have to have an idea of the fiscals, the tax regime, all that, so that you can come out on whether you can go ahead or not. So, but unfortunately, as Nigeria is delaying, um, there are findings in different places. In fact, there are finds around the Gulf of Guinea now. Many countries that initially before didn't have oil and gas now have. In fact, there is a large find by Mobil, ExxonMobil in Guyana, and that's why you see that much of what they're doing, they're actually selling the assets and moving over there. So we have told government that investors are not waiting for you. Investors are not charities. Investors are not waiting to say, let's wait whenever Nigeria is ready. Investors have funds and they're looking for where to put these funds and earn the maximum return, the best return possible for their shareholders. And if Nigeria continues to be like that, they won't show interest. Ghana have passed their own petrol industry bill within 2 years.
I was going to say that.
I think one other country came to Nigeria, took our PIB, flipped it around, and they've passed it into law. So ours, the way we are running our oil and gas industry, is not different from the way we are running our country. It's not different from the way we are running our country. We are just simply doing, and that is what we're interested in, is just get the oil out, sell it, and then of course distribute the money, and then remove the one you will use to import refined petroleum products. And that is also another painful aspect of it, because we also explain to government that look, much of the benefit of the oil and gas industry to the economy is in the downstream and midstream sectors, not in the upstream. How many people will work in the upstream? There are normally very few. So why don't you do something about the refineries? And we try to give government models. We say, look, you already have a partnership between government and
Wow. We've lost comrade. I think connectivity has made us lose him. I'm sure he'll be back shortly. We lost him due to connectivity. But VIO, while we wait for comrade to return, and I hope he returns soon, one of our contributors has said, oh, we should expect this whole thing to be passed before the end of the year. And I'm hoping that that is not us being too optimistic. This has waited for 20 years. 20 years VIO. What do you think is the biggest challenge to the passage of the PIB?
Okay, I want to feel that that concern is mutual based on what our leaders say, but their official behavior tends to manifest in the opposite. What needs to be done? There's been a lot of conversation around what needs to be done, and one of the things they did, I think Comrade is back, but one of the things,
my network.
No, that's okay. That's okay, comrade. We know that we know what network is doing to us.
No, let her complete what
yes,
she's saying.
Once she finishes, we'll come back to you. Yes, VIO, please go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things they did was to split the bill, the parent PIB, in Petroleum Industry Bill, into four. The four parts include the Petroleum Host and Impacted Communities Development Bill, the Petroleum Industry Fiscal Bill, and Petroleum Industry Administration Bill, then the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. So the four different bills make different provisions addressing different aspects of the sector. And what they hoped to do by splitting it into four different legislation is to accelerate passage, to see whether it applies for accelerate passage. But as you can see, the PIGB, which is the one that's talking about institutional transformation and regulatory changes, making like different corporate.
The challenges of network. The challenges of network. Comrade,
industry and regulatory reforms. You've seen how long it also at the end of the day. Then that defeats the argument that splitting the bill into four would hasten the passage. Then there is also other conversation. I think why this bill has not been passed. This is me saying what I think. What I think is not a popular view is because we have not tied humanity, people, to passage. Focus has a lot been on economic benefits to the country rather than benefits to people. So when politicians and IOCs and the public, general public, when they discuss the bill, they discuss it in terms of millions of petrodollars they are missing, dollars losing, investment opportunities. It's been discussed in dollar and naira. It's not discussed in the cost, in terms of human cost. So maybe if those that are most affected link the two issues and say, no, you can't talk about this without talking about this, then I think that government may be pushed to take this bill seriously. Let me tell you why I say that. While we are still having this 20-year conversation on the petroleum industrial bill, Nigeria, I think October last year, the Senate and the House of Assembly, they concurred in passing or amending the Offshore and Inland Basin Production Sharing Contract Act of 2014. And that bill, in summary, simply amended the basis for the calculation of royalties. And again, it also tried to increase the, I'm trying to find the word again, the water depths in deep offshore for, frontier acreages for crude oil and condensates. I didn't hear what he said.
No, I said for royalty purposes.
For royalty purposes. And that is, if you look at that bill, while they were waiting for PIB, this one talks about money, immediate cash. The PIB delay did not stop them from passing or amending this bill that talks only about money. That is to tell you that money, when we have put PIB and money on the same pedestal, the conversation about communities will always take a back seat. And one way to make things different is to tie humanity, which is the communities, make it an integral part of even the economic aspects, economic benefits of the bill. Maybe that kind of push can make the government think, differently and use a different approach in getting the bill passed.
Okay, comrade, we're going to come back because you were dealing with something, and I would like you to address some of the issues VIO is raising. Because my question here is, does government care? I mean, does government really care about the humanity?
Okay, so
about the Naira and Kobo. Yes, go ahead, comrade.
If we really want to situate why the PIB has not been passed, it's simple.
Yes.
The PIB has not been passed because the PIB seeks to whittle down the powers of the minister and the power of the president. So the Petroleum Act allows the president to allocate a discretionary allocation of oil blocks. And the PIB, people have questioned that. If you remember very well, the Petroleum Act was actually passed as a decree during the Civil War. So a lot of powers were given to the president and the minister. And so no minister sitting on the seat wants to lose those powers. And it also requires for some kind of adjustment of the NNPC, which, of course, which they do not want to lose control of. So each time he goes and he has to do with those things, it will not be signed into law. On the PSC Amendment Act, it started as a Supreme Court judgment. There was a case between Rivers State, Bayelsa, and Akwa Ibom. Rivers State, Bayelsa, and Akwa Ibom took the government to court, reminding them that the PSC Act says that after so number of years, they're supposed to amend some of the rates that are used in the calculation. And then, of course, there was a consent judgment between both parties, and part of it is that the government should put in place process of recovery, which included amending the law. And of course, so the law has been amended, but of course, you know that the oil companies also signed the PSC agreements with each of the with the federal government, and under international law, those PSC agreements would need renegotiation before the government will get all those money they've been expecting. And that's why all those money they've been saying that they will expect, all those back money and the rest, that's why they've not gotten them, because otherwise the matter will go to international arbitration for settlement. So I think that that discussion is going on at the high level. But as VIO pointed out, it just tells us the fact that if the government and the National Assembly are truly committed to passing the PIB, that they will do so, even in less than a month. So their delay is basically showcasing the fact that they do not intend to. So they will every National Assembly will do a drama around it, and then after the drama, there'll be public. And in fact, the PIB is an industry right now. It's an industry, because if you look at the money that has been spent in National Assembly, it's an industry. Because the National Assembly will get their consultants, they will travel different parts of the world to see how it works, and then do all kinds of things and come back, and then they will now call everybody, and then of course different consultants on petroleum economics, petroleum and energy laws will all be here, and then everywhere will be boiling, and then there will be all kinds of interest, and then suddenly it will just die quietly. So, and it's basically political interest, So if they are determined, they will pass it. And that is where the citizens come in. So I agree with VIO when she talks about the human part. Because if the citizens raise a voice, because in 2012, if you remember, when the unions and the civil society formed back and decided to take some actions, that was part of what led to the 2012 PIB, actually. Because it was after that several committees were set up, plans were set up, and then there was one on recovery of money. That one was head by former EFCC chairman, all those, and that's justice. So if the citizens can continue the mobilization, intensify it, they will do something about it. But if not, the politicians really do not are politicians, their families are not in Nigeria. So if your family, the Bible says where your treasure is, there your heart is. If your family is not in Nigeria, your heart is not in Nigeria. Nigeria becomes like an oil worker who goes to work in the field. So he flies down, does his work, and leaves back. So to the extent that their families are not here, they are just here with us, getting the money. This is the workshop where they get the money and dispatch of their families. They are not really so much concerned about what will become of this country with the way we are going about things. But again, that is them. If we as citizens unite and raise our voices, I think that we'll be able to direct them to the area we think will be in the best interest of everyone. But if we continue to overlook them, when something becomes sensational, we all join in the sensational conversation, and thereafter it dies down. Of course, there won't be enough force to compel them to do what they did. Again, the PIC Act was also passed because government is facing serious revenue shortage, very revenue challenge. And in the midst of that revenue challenge, they've passed the Finance Act, and they increased the value added tax to 7.5%. They are now asking people, the Stamp Duty Act, they expanded the scope. They are now asking landlords to collect 6% on every rent. And of course, they even extended it to when workers are losing their jobs. The compensation for loss of employment is now a subject of tax. So a lot is happening this period. Unfortunately, permit me to also indict my own group, the labor movement. Both the labor movement and the civil society have not actually raised their voices. So I do not know how Nigerians will look back at this moment many years to come. I do not know how those of us that have little roles to play, how they will judge us. But I think that we've not done the best that we can do. I think we can do better than what we are currently doing now.
Oh my goodness. We've not done the best that we can. Let me ask a question that might indeed be stupid, but permit me. And that's the question, why don't we just have one extractive industries bill? Because if passing the Solid Minerals Act wasn't an ordeal, people did not spend 20 years. There weren't too many consultants. People did not split heads. Nobody broke their head. And it's
absolutely
it's the extractive industries. Why don't we just have what is source for the goose is source for the gander? Why don't we just have one extractive industry set, and then we all rest? Why can't that happen?
So
yes,
you know how it works,
right?
Okay, you know the oil industry when it started was actually miscellaneous, and that's how the extractive industry looks miscellaneous now. And when something is miscellaneous, you are able to put in a lot of things because so much attention is not on it. One. Two is that the extractive industry appears to benefit the majority in the country. So it was not difficult for them to garner the required number to get it passed. But again, we also did not see protests by people from the Niger Delta, people from the oil-producing areas complaining, because I'm sure if our senators, our reps had also raised their voices, and if our people, ordinary people, had also raised their voices, I think that would have provided an opportunity for them to look at both of them. And then if the two are different laws, the benefits accruing to the communities should be the same, because it is the same risk that the communities in the Niger Delta are going through, that the communities in Zamfara or elsewhere where they have extractive industrial activities are also going through. But of course, you can see what has happened. So I think that we need a lot of voices to be raised for this thing to be taken on board. We need a lot of voices. And those voices, I think, should start from the ordinary people, because if you are waiting for the political class, I do not think that they will start. I think that maybe along the way, the political class will join. But usually, I don't see them starting it, because maybe they feel that it will negatively impact on their political career.
I don't get, how does it negatively impact on their political career? They're going to be beneficiaries. I mean, if they stand as voices for the people, then the people will love them, no?
No, okay. So at the National Assembly, my role in Nupeng and Pengasan has given me some insight into the kind of politics they played here. People want to be chairman of committees. It's like if you're not chairman of an important committee, you won't get a juicy committee, you are not going to get so much benefits. And usually, of course, the people that have the numbers are the ones who actually dictate who are going to be in those committees. So as a result of that, when our people go there, they try to make sure that they form alliances with all those other people to see whether through those alliances they will be able to get into those committees. Having gotten into those committees, they somehow try to moderate their speeches, their thoughts, and what they can push through. So again, I think that if we here are actually putting pressures on them, then that will provide a platform for them to say, look, our people are complaining, we can't continue like this. And indeed, we can't continue like this.
VIO, your comments on this matter of Uniform Extractive Industries bill?
Yeah, I agree with most of the things she said, that there is need for stronger push. There's this dichotomy between solid minerals and petroleum mineral oil is wide and unfair, and I actually think it's unjust because it confers advantages on certain people that others do not have. And number two is, when we talk about benefits, I look at benefit from two perspectives. And I also look at participation from two perspectives. One is civic participation, one is economic participation. So for Solid Minerals Act, what it has done is to seamlessly weave both social, economic benefit and put communities at the center of it all, which allows communities, individuals living in extractive zones, to decide their level of economic participation in the sector. So it means that if you are mining gold in your backyard, no matter how you mine it, as long as you have gold, you have a legal market to sell it. But that doesn't apply to people in the Delta. When you now do the same thing, we'll call it artisanal mining. And the market for you to sell it is now regarded to as illegal. And is it really illegal? I think that what we call illegal artisanal refining has remained in that state because regulatory advantages have not been extended to them. I saw one report from SDN saying that the quality of oil done in those sites in the Niger Delta was even a better quality than those, some of them.
Yes.
Imported fuel. So if local communities, in fact, do you know that many people in Niger Delta region, they know the difference between what was refined at their backyard and the ones that were imported? They know, an average Niger Delta know, and they buy the local ones and they have not experienced any damage to their instruments. That is to say that regulatory protection is what they need to increase, like I said, a country that is talking about how to diversify the economy. These are the kind of things that, so it allows the community people, the young people that we say that are bunkering oil, they don't need to be doing oil bunkering. They will not legitimately, maybe even if they're asking for a different kind of licensing, they could be limited to a particular production capacity. Say, don't exceed this, don't exceed that. You can't have, Nigeria is talking about modular refineries. Those people from the region who have the financial capability can invest in the region and create employment. So creation of employment is not just by calling people, hiring 1,000 aides, SA on this, SA on that. That's just like the only kind of job creation I see in the region. And it is not job creation, it's called political patronage. For me, that's what I say. So some kind of empowerment, economic instruments that provide the space for people to participate socially and economically. They don't just have to participate from PIB at the National Assembly level. After discussing, they go back and practically not to nothing. So those two spaces need to be merged. They need to go hand in hand. I don't think that because Nigeria is not losing any money, if you ask me, that, from PIB, all the laws that they need to get money, they've been passing them. So I actually think is the absence of political will to get this bill passed. That is what I see as the problem. So people in the region need to work harder. The political class in the region, I'll be happier as an individual working as a consultant to a state government in the region on the PIB than working with, some other source of, or different, because it makes it easier for me, because when I'm working with the state government, we now know that your priority is the state.
Yes.
Benefit to the state. It makes your focus to be very narrow. Then you can think clearly and objectively with the state and say, what can we do to increase the benefit to our communities? This is the kind of conversation we need to have with the executive governors of all the different states. There are security votes. I don't think the money is not available. The amount of money spent on security votes, the amount of money spent on political gatherings, the amount of money spent on political aides that are not doing anything. Omar, he just served, Governor Omar of Ebonyi said just served over 1,000 aides. He said they were doing nothing. And I know that most of these governors know that their aides are doing nothing. I know that they know. So all of that money, get people on your team, put your money where your mouth is, because the long-term benefits come back to the states. Come to think about it. How much are you even paying consultants? 5 million, 10 million, 15 million. How much is that? It's not a lot of money that just help you think through a process, then gives you, in the long term, your state gets better benefits, better resources, better allocation than allowing the governor to use those resources for the betterment of his or her state. So these are the kind of things that needs to shift, are the kind of things that need to change for us to begin to see, benefits trickle down to communities.
Thank you, VIO. And I'm so sorry, today it's been a crazy day with the networks there breaking up like there is no tomorrow. Comrade, there's so much we've talked about right now. And all of us agree that it might serve us better if we're thinking of one uniform law. We don't have that. But can't we borrow? Can't we now be making the argument to say what is sauce for the goose must be sauce for the gander? If these provisions have been made and the man who has gold at his backyard can have access to produce that gold, can't we begin to push for these kinds of initiatives at the level of the state governments, the local governments? How can we have this conversation without necessarily seeming like, we're trying to oust anybody? Because clearly, we're not upset. We're pleased to see the Solid Metals Act, great act. The presidential initiative on gold is beautiful. And we're saying, can we just transpose that and also have a similar initiative in the Niger Delta? How can Labour help us have this conversation? And how can all of us be involved in having this conversation and pushing it forward? Comrade.
Okay, so let me say that relying on Labour to have this conversation will be very difficult. Because Labour is first of all focused on Labour issues, and the best the Labour people can do is when there is a bill to make comments around the bill on some of these issues. So Labour expects that the Niger Delta civil society groups should be the ones to raise their voices on these injustices. Labour cannot join to say, please, can you support them? Because if you don't, this thing may snowball into crisis and it may affect our members and then, of course, affect our industry. So it's from that perspective that Labour will come back. Yes, but it will be difficult for Labour to champion the struggle for the Niger Delta people.
We have to champion
it will be very difficult because they will be going outside of their mandate.
Wow. Well, it's been an evening of very intense conversation, very enlightening for me. I don't know about you. I see some people say very insightful, but clearly these conversations this is just a teaser, because we do need to do a bit more. And I'm going to have my guests give us last words. Next steps. One of the things we do on Conversations with Aibee is after we've done the analysis, we say next steps. So what are the next steps, practical steps we all have to take? If we have to start calling all of our representatives, can we start doing them? What are the next steps to mainstream this matter and say, before the end of this 9th Assembly, indeed, before the end of next year, let us tell ourselves that we must see this thing passed. VIO, next steps. What do you think? And this is your final comment.
I already talked about my next steps for Spaces for Change. We are thinking in the context of a beneficiary income, region-wide beneficiary income campaign, whereby we're drawing, voices like yours and everybody that we can assess to see whether we can influence that collective regional thinking about what to do to improve the lives of people in the Niger Delta. So I also speak as a Niger Delta, and I come from Imo State. Imo is part of the Niger Delta states. And I go around my state. I do not see that people in my state are getting the benefits of oil resources. And I'm taking it as a personal responsibility, and my colleagues in Spaces for Change are joining me for us to take our campaign forward from advocacy to real action on the field.
Beautiful. Action. We're taking action. Right. Comrade, next steps. What are we going to do?
Okay, so I think that we need to sensitize the Niger Delta people. They need to know what we are losing by remaining lukewarm regarding issues that concern us, such as the Petroleum Host Community. And let me say one thing. Whether we get the benefits as host communities or not, we are already getting the cost as host communities. We are getting the environmental pollution. We are in Port Harcourt, we are all breathing that. We are getting the issues around how people lose their farmlands and how people lose their fishing ports to oil and gas activities. We are getting the impact of environmental degradation concerning farming and concerning fishing. I grew up in my village in Emo. I didn't grow up in Port Harcourt, and I know when I was growing up, I was going to fish, I was going to farm. Right now, those who go to fish cannot say that they use the evening like this will go catch, and then of course we are done for the week also. But now, when I go home, people are buying ice fish. Then actually it used to be an insult for somebody from Emoha to eat ice fish, but now it is the order of the day. And of course, the impact around the lost opportunities to ourselves and our children is there. So if we don't do anything to make sure that we ameliorate our circumstances and that of our children, the word bestowed. We have bestowed them a fait accompli regarding a difficult future. So if we don't want to do it for ourselves, I think we need to do it for the sake of our children.
Our children. Wow. Let me thank both.
So for me, I think that mobilization is very. Then we also need to engage our political leaders. Engage them, because I think that if a senator or a representative from the Niger Delta raises this thing on the floor of the National Assembly, I think it will make headline. Rather than, I think there will be more movement around it than if they just continue to wait for ordinary people to be pushing it.
Right. Let me thank both
I'm through. Okay.
Yeah, let me thank both of you. Comrade Chief Chika Onuegbu, this has been wonderful having you here. You've brought great perspectives to our conversation this evening. VIOR, you didn't disappoint, and I'm not surprised. Thank you absolutely for the kind of work you're doing in the region and the kind of work you're doing with Spaces for Change. Always, it's because of you that we are here, those of you who take your time, spend your data, and you come on to listen to these conversations. Your comments are instructive, your comments are helpful. Thank you so much for joining us. We keep having these conversations. We keep insisting that silence is not an option. For us as Nigerians, for us as people who must make a difference.
Thank you, Aibee.
Silence is not an option. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening. It's been a great show. Friday next week, I'll see you guys again. We'll have some other guests. We'll talk about something else, and we will move our country forward. It's been a great time. Thank you, guys.